Hi guys, I'm Greg Howlett, and I want to talk today about one of my favorite things. This is one of the little things that I do every time I sit down at the piano. Doesn't take a lot of effort, doesn't take a lot of theory knowledge, but it will make a big difference in your music. And so let's get started. What we're going to do today is we're going to change our one chords in our songs to more expressive, more dissonant, more interesting sounds. Okay, now the way we're going to do this is we're going to start with the basic one chord, which is normally just going to be a triad, a major triad, and we're going to add an additional note to it so it becomes a major seventh. Now we're going to be working today with a song called Spirit of the Living God, and I have it in E flat, so we'll start with the E flat chord, which is in the key of E flat, which is your one chord. And we're going to start with the triad, which is an E flat, G, and B flat. And then we're going to add the fourth note to it, which is called the major seventh, which ironically makes it a major seventh chord. This can get a little bit confusing. By the way, if you ever get lost in any of this, I encourage you to pick up a course I have on my website called the Chord Toolbox. And the Chord Toolbox will talk about these chords in great detail. But the major seventh chord is essentially just a major triad with the major seventh added. And the way you do that is you start with the root, which is E flat, you go down one half step, which is D, and that's the note that you add to the chord. That's your major seventh. So instead of playing E flat, G, and B flat, we're going to play those three notes plus a D. Now here's what happens when you do that. You create what we call a primary dissonance that occurs between the E flat and the D. That's either a major seventh interval or a minor second interval, and we call those a prime dissonance, not a prime distance, a prime dissonance. And prime dissonances make music interesting, and it all of a sudden turns what's sort of boring into something that sounds a lot more sophisticated. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you in a second. Here's the rule. The rule is very simple. If you run across a one chord in your song, you usually can add the major seventh to it to make it sound better. Okay? Now, let's take Spirit of the Living God. The first chord is an E flat chord, and we're in the key of E flat. Okay? So anytime we see an E flat in this song, we know it's the one chord, and we're going to do our thing on it. We're going to add the major seventh to it. So that first chord, I can add a D to. Instead of just playing this like you would see in the hymnal, E flat, B flat, E flat, and G, I'm actually just going to take my right thumb and slide it down from E flat to D. Okay, so here's the first way, here's the second way. We call this churchy. Sometimes I hear musicians refer to that as churchy, and when they do, they're not complimenting. They're saying it's sort of boring, old style harmony. Here's a much more sophisticated sound with the major seventh. So essentially that's all we're going to do. We got to find some way to get a D into the chord, and you can do it in a lot of different ways. The way I'm doing it then is I'm still playing a D here. I have an octave, a G octave, throwing a D, and then I'm playing an open fifth in the left hand. Okay, let's talk about that first bar for just a second. Here's the first way. This is with just the triad. Sounds sort of boring. Here's the second way, where we use the major seventh instead. Much better sound. One thing I could do maybe to contrast the two is I'll play half of the bar with just a major triad, and then I'll play major seventh for the second half, and that would sound like this. That sounds really nice, and you can do that as well. Some people might say that you shouldn't use major sevenths all the time. I tend to use them a lot, but not all the time. Sometimes you may just want the simple sound of a triad. That's your first bar. Now on the screen you can see that we have two more E flats in the first line. Start of bar 3. That's technically an E flat, well, E flat over B flat, which is a second inversion E flat chord. If you're from the classical school and you study classical theory, you may not think of that as a one chord. You may think of it as a subdominant, which leads to the 5 of the dominant. I don't think I'm going to look at it that way. I'm just going to call it a 1 chord for right now, and I'm going to add a D to it right there. That's sort of a dissonant sound. I have a prime dissonance right in the middle of that. It's up to you if you like that or not. And now we come to the next E flat, which I'm going to put a D into right here. Keep going. Here's another E flat chord. I threw a D in right here. Same thing as the first line. There's your D. Okay, and at the end of the second line, we have the one exception that you need to watch out for. And it goes like this, guys. If the melody note is the root of the chord, you probably don't want to add the major seventh to that chord. Leave it just a triad for right now. There's other options, but right now just leave it a triad. If you throw a major seventh to that chord, you have something that sounds like this. Now, there's a few musicians out there that are great musicians that probably can get away with that. And there may be a place for that kind of sound, but even the modern jazz world sort of stays away from that. They don't really consider that acceptable, and if they don't consider it acceptable as much as they like dissonance, in church we probably should as well. So we're going to stay away from that particular sound because it's not a right or wrong thing, it's just what our ears seem to like at this point in time in history. And so if the root of the chord is the melody note, in other words, the melody note is the same as the chord name, in this case E flat, we're going to stay away from using the major seventh in that chord. So we're just going to leave that as a triad. Keep going. Okay, so the next line, you have an A flat chord, which is your 4 chord. And 4 chords are just like 1 chords. You can add the major seventh to them as well, but the same rule applies. If the root of the chord is the same as the melody note, we're not going to do it. And that's the case here. You see that we have an A flat chord, but the melody note is also A flat. So we're going to leave that as just a triad. But the next chord, that's E flat. I'm going to add a D to it. And that's it for this line. Back to the next line. Again, I got the D right there. Okay, so I'm going to talk about something really quick here. This is a little extra that I just noticed. Notice on the second bar of that last line, we're moving to the 4 chord again. When you're moving to a 4 chord, you actually have a choice. You can add either the major seventh or, even for a better, smoother sound, this is a situation where you can add the minor seventh. So in other words, instead of throwing a D in, you could throw a D flat. Okay? What that does, essentially, for you theory buffs, again, is it changes that chord from a 1 chord into a 5/4 secondary dominant. And it makes it want to resolve. It makes a need for a resolution to the 4 chord. So essentially, let's say we started that last bar with, or that first bar with this, D flat major 7. Now we're going to move it to E flat. I think did I say E flat major 7 is how we start. Now we're going to move to E flat dominant, and now to the A flat. Okay, that's a nice little sound. If that just went over your head, no biggie. That was just a little extra. But essentially what we're doing there is we're using a little functional harmony by inserting a secondary dominant in front of that A flat. But anyway, let's keep going. You may have to go back and watch that again, I don't know. Back to the E flat over B, D flat there. Last chord is an E flat chord, but the melody note is E flat as well, so we're going to leave that one alone. I'll play it all through, and then we will be done. Here we go. have it. Really simple, really easy to use. I hope you can use it. I hope you will. It'll really make a difference in your overall sound. And I will see you next time.